Most people think of the US Navy in terms of individual warships, carriers, destroyers, submarines, and amphibious assault ships moving across a map. But the Navy does not actually operate as a loose collection of vessels. It functions through a far more structured system of numbered fleets, each assigned to a specific theater, mission set, or operational domain. Those fleets are the framework that turns American sea power from hardware into a global operating system. At a distance, the concept seems simple. One fleet watches the Atlantic, another covers the Pacific, others manage Europe, the Middle East, Latin America, or cyberspace. But the real significance of the fleet system is not geography alone. It is command architecture. Each fleet acts as a regional nerve center that receives forces, organizes missions, coordinates with combatant commands, and translates national strategy into daily operations at sea. That is what makes the system larger than its public image. The visible part is a ship crossing an ocean or a carrier group entering a disputed region. The less visible part is the command network behind it. Training pipelines on the East Coast, force handoffs across the Pacific, allied coordination in Europe, patrol frameworks in the Caribbean, and cyber operations running continuously in the background. The fleet structure is what allows those separate actions to function as one coherent machine. It also reveals how the Navy thinks about risk. Some fleets exist to defend maritime approaches to the United States. Some exist to sustain deterrence in permanently tense regions. Others do not own ships full-time at all, but instead assemble temporary forces for narrower missions like regional exercises, narcotics interdiction, or humanitarian response. One fleet is not even tied to water. 10th Fleet operates in cyberspace, proving that naval power now depends as much on networks and information dominance as on hulls and missiles. So the real story is not just where these fleets are. It is how each one is built to solve a different strategic problem. And to understand that system, the first step is to examine how geography becomes command. To understand how these fleets actually function, the first thing to examine is not firepower, but geography. The US Navy's numbered fleets are built around maritime theaters, and that geographic division is what gives the entire force its structure. A fleet is not simply a permanent stack of ships parked in one place. It is a command layer assigned to a region, designed to receive forces, direct operations, and integrate naval activity with a broader American combat command. That distinction matters. The Navy separates responsibility by ocean space, choke points, and strategic traffic lanes. Second Fleet focuses on the North Atlantic and the maritime approaches to North America. Third Fleet covers the Eastern and Northern Pacific. Fourth Fleet concentrates on the Caribbean and Latin America. Fifth Fleet is tied to the Middle East and the waters around the Arabian Gulf, Red Sea, and Arabian Sea. Sixth Fleet operates across Europe and Africa. Seventh Fleet oversees the Western Pacific and much of the Indo-Pacific front line. 10th Fleet, operating in cyber and information space, supports all of them from outside traditional geography. This arrangement allows Washington to manage a global navy without trying to command every ship from one headquarters. Each fleet commander translates broad strategic guidance into regional execution. That means tracking local threats, coordinating with allies, planning exercises, maintaining presence, and preparing for crises specific to that theater. A destroyer in the Mediterranean, a submarine in the Western Pacific, and a patrol aircraft near the Caribbean are all part of the same Navy, but they answer to very different operational frameworks. The system also creates flexibility. Ships, aircraft, and marine units can be reassigned across theaters, but once they arrive, they plug into an existing regional command network rather than improvising one from scratch. That is why a deployment is more than movement. It is an administrative and operational handoff into a new strategic environment. And once geography defines responsibility, the next question becomes even more important. Who actually provides the ships, sailors, and formations that those fleets command when a crisis begins? Geography may define responsibility, but fleets do not generate combat power on their own. That role belongs to the force generation side of the Navy, the system that trains, equips, certifies, and delivers units before they are handed off to an operational commander. In practice, this means the numbered fleets are the users of naval power, while organizations on the force provider side are responsible for making that power ready in the first place. This is one of the least visible but most important mechanics in the Navy's structure. A fleet commander may oversee operations in the Atlantic, Mediterranean, or Western Pacific, but the ships assigned to those missions usually come from larger administrative commands, such as U.S. Fleet Forces Command or Pacific Fleet. Those commands maintain the force, manage readiness cycles, and decide when a carrier strike group, amphibious readiness group, destroyer squadron, or submarine force is prepared for deployment. The fleets then employ those units inside their designated theaters. That distinction prevents the Navy from becoming regionally trapped. A ship is not built to belong permanently to one numbered fleet in the public sense. Instead, it moves through a cycle of maintenance, training, certification, and deployment. During that cycle, it may be prepared on one coast, certified under one command structure, and then transferred to a fleet operating thousands of miles away. A destroyer based in San Diego might deploy into 7th Fleet. A carrier from the East Coast may ultimately serve under 5th or 6th Fleet during an overseas deployment. A clear example is the Carrier Strike Group model. The carrier, its air wing, escorts, logistics support, and staff do not simply sail out as separate units. They are assembled, trained to operate as one formation, and only then placed under the relevant fleet commander for real-world missions. That handoff is what turns readiness into presence. But once those formations enter a theater, they still need internal order. Ships do not operate as a flat list under one admiral. They enter a hierarchy of task forces, strike groups, and subordinate commands built for specific missions. Once forces are assigned to a fleet, they are not managed as one undifferentiated mass. The Navy breaks them down into layered operational formations, each built for a distinct mission, scale, and level of control. This is where the fleet system starts to look less like a map and more like an operating hierarchy. Admirals do not command every ship directly. They command through task forces, strike groups, expeditionary elements, and specialized subordinate staffs that make large-scale operations manageable. At the highest level inside a theater, a fleet commander can establish numbered or named task forces to handle specific functions. One task force may oversee carrier operations. Another may focus on logistics, anti-submarine warfare, amphibious activity, patrol forces, or regional partnerships. This structure allows the fleet to divide responsibility without losing unity of command. It also makes the system adaptable. The same region can be reorganized quickly, depending on whether the mission is deterrence, warfighting, evacuation, missile defense, or maritime security. Below that level, the most recognizable combat package is the strike group. A carrier strike group combines an aircraft carrier, its embarked air wing, guided missile escorts, and supporting staff into one deployable formation. An amphibious readiness group does something similar with amphibious ships carrying marines, aircraft, and landing capability for crisis response or expeditionary operations. Surface action groups can be assembled for narrower missions built around destroyers or cruisers without a carrier. Submarine forces, meanwhile, often operate under tighter classification and a different command rhythm, but still plug into the same, broader hierarchy. This layered system has been refined over decades of deployments. In practice, it allows one fleet to manage very different missions at the same time. A carrier presence patrol, an amphibious exercise, ballistic missile defense, and freedom of navigation operations, all under separate operational cells but within one theater command. But hierarchy alone does not keep these formations effective. To function across months at sea and thousands of miles from home, they depend on an even less visible system: logistics, sustainment, and the supply architecture that keeps the fleet moving. Naval power is often measured by ship counts, missile ranges, or aircraft capacity. But fleets do not remain operational because of the weapons they carry. They remain operational because an enormous logistics framework follows behind them, often outside public attention. Once a strike group, amphibious force, or patrol formation enters a theater, its effectiveness depends on fuel, ammunition, spare parts, food, repair access, medical support, and secure lines of communication. Without that support layer, presence becomes temporary and combat endurance collapses quickly. This is why logistics is not a support function at the margins of fleet operations. It is one of the central mechanics that determines how long the Navy can stay in position and how fast it can respond when conditions change. Replenishment oilers transfer fuel at sea. Ammunition and supply ships move ordnance, provisions, and replacement equipment forward. Sea lift capacity, port access agreements, dry docks, and prepositioned stocks all extend the fleet's reach beyond what combat ships could sustain on their own. The importance of this system becomes obvious in long-distance theaters. A destroyer, operating in the Western Pacific, is thousands of miles from the industrial base that built and maintains it. A carrier in the Middle East depends on a chain of escorts, aviation supply networks, maintenance crews, and resupply vessels that stretch across oceans and allied ports. Even peacetime deployments require constant coordination between operational commanders and logistics planners to prevent gaps in fuel, maintenance windows, and munitions availability. History has repeatedly reinforced this reality. The modern Navy's ability to sustain a near-continuous presence in places like the Persian Gulf or Western Pacific has depended less on one dramatic deployment than on routine, disciplined sustainment over years. The fleet remains credible because it can stay on station, rotate forces, and absorb wear without breaking the larger system. But sustainment alone does not decide where fleets go or why they remain in certain waters. Behind every deployment is another layer of decision-making: the strategic priorities that determine which regions receive constant naval attention and which threats shape the Navy's posture in the first place. Logistics explains how the fleet stays at sea. Strategy explains why it is there in the first place. The numbered fleet system is ultimately shaped by national priorities, which means the Navy does not distribute attention evenly across the globe. It concentrates effort where trade routes, alliance commitments, military rivals, and crisis zones create the greatest strategic pressure. That is why some fleets carry a far heavier operational burden than others, even though all are part of the same institution. In practical terms, The fleet map mirrors the hierarchy of American security interests. Seventh Fleet sits at the center of the Indo-Pacific, where the United States must monitor contested waters, reassure treaty allies, and maintain access across some of the world's busiest sea lanes. Fifth Fleet operates in and around the Middle East, where choke points such as the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb can affect energy flows and regional stability far beyond the immediate area. Sixth Fleet connects naval power to Europe, the Mediterranean, and the Black Sea region, where alliance coordination is often as important as direct combat capability. This regional weighting has changed over time. During the Cold War, the Atlantic and Mediterranean were defined heavily by competition with the Soviet Union. After the Cold War, the Middle East absorbed sustained naval attention through sanctions enforcement, carrier deployments, and maritime security operations. In the 21st century, strategic emphasis increasingly shifted toward the Indo-Pacific, where long-term competition, naval modernization by peer rivals, and the defense of Allied maritime networks pushed Seventh Fleet to the foreground. That shift does not mean other theaters became irrelevant. It means the Navy must constantly balance finite ships and crews against simultaneous demands. A crisis in the Red Sea can pull assets from one theater. A deterrence requirement in the Pacific can delay maintenance elsewhere. The fleet structure exists partly to manage those trade-offs without losing global coherence. But strategic priorities alone do not produce effective action. Once a region becomes important, the fleet still needs something more precise than presence. It needs intelligence, surveillance, and a constant stream of information that tells commanders what is happening across their waters in real time. A fleet can only control what it can detect, track, and interpret. That is why intelligence and surveillance are not supporting details in naval operations. They are part of the core machinery. Before a destroyer changes course, before an aircraft is launched, and before a commander escalates posture in a contested region, the fleet relies on a steady stream of data drawn from ships, aircraft, submarines, satellites, sensors, partner nations, and networked command systems. This information picture is broader than traditional espionage. In naval terms, it includes maritime patrol aircraft scanning sea lanes, radar systems tracking air and missile activity, acoustic networks monitoring submarine movement, cyber tools protecting command architecture, and intelligence staffs fusing reports into a usable operational picture. The goal is not simply to know that a threat exists. It is to understand location, timing, intent, and pattern. A fleet commander needs to know whether a contact is routine traffic, a military signal, a decoy, or the early stage of a larger operation. This is especially important in regions where naval competition happens below the threshold of open conflict. In the Western Pacific, for example, the challenge is often persistence, rather than dramatic confrontation. Commanders must monitor exercises, vessel concentrations, air patrols, Coast Guard activity, and changes in regional posture over. Knowing what is happening at sea is not enough by itself. The fleet system only works because the Navy has a layered chain of command that turns information into coordinated action without collapsing into confusion. This is one of the central reasons numbered fleets exist. They are not symbolic headquarters. They are operational command nodes positioned between national strategy and frontline units, translating political direction into executable military tasks. At the top, naval operations are shaped by civilian leadership and national command authority. But those decisions do not travel directly from Washington to an individual destroyer captain or submarine commander. They move through combatant commands, service leadership, and fleet commanders who are responsible for turning broad objectives into regional orders. In practice, this means a fleet commander sits at a critical intersection, accountable to higher strategic guidance, but also responsible for the daily control of forces spread across an enormous maritime area. This structure becomes especially important during fast-moving crises. A missile threat near a choke point, an unsafe intercept at sea, or a regional escalation involving Allied forces requires decisions that are both disciplined and immediate. The fleet headquarters provides that coordination. It can redirect ships, assign aircraft, raise force protection levels, shift surveillance priorities, and synchronize with joint or allied partners without waiting for every decision to be improvised from the top. That balance between centralized authority and delegated execution is what allows the Navy to operate globally without losing tempo. The system also protects coherence across different mission types. A fleet commander may simultaneously oversee deterrence patrols, routine exercises, intelligence collection, partner engagement, and contingency planning. Without a clear command ladder, those activities would compete for assets and create friction between operational priorities. A useful way to understand the fleet is to see it as a translator. It receives strategic intent in one language and converts it into movement, patrol patterns, rules of engagement, logistics sequencing, and operational posture. But even the best command structure is limited by the quality of the people inside it. To make this machine function, the Navy needs a training and readiness system that prepares crews and staffs long before deployment begins. A fleet's effectiveness is decided long before it enters a contested region. By the time a carrier strike group crosses into the Western Pacific or a destroyer begins patrols near a choke point, most of the important preparation has already happened through training, certification, and readiness management. This is the hidden production line behind naval presence. Fleets can command ships in theater, but they depend on a separate system to ensure those ships arrive with competent crews, reliable equipment, and staffs capable of operating under pressure. That readiness process is extensive because modern naval operations are highly technical and highly layered. A warship is not simply a platform with weapons attached. It is a moving institution that requires qualified watch teams, engineering crews, aviation support, maintenance specialists, intelligence personnel, and command staff all functioning in sync. Before deployment, units move through workups that test navigation, damage control, missile defense, anti-submarine warfare, communications discipline, live fire procedures, and integration with other ships and aircraft. The goal is not just competence in isolation, but performance as part of a larger formation. This is why the Navy treats readiness as a cycle rather than a permanent condition. Ships leave deployment and enter maintenance. Crews rotate, equipment is repaired, certifications expire, and training standards must be rebuilt. Then comes the next progression: individual qualification, unit-level exercises, group integration, and final certification before forces are released for operational use. If this cycle is rushed or disrupted, the consequences appear later at sea in the form of fatigue, mechanical strain, or degraded decision-making. Several hard lessons over the past decade have reinforced that point. Operational demand can pressure the Navy to keep forces forward, but overextension creates readiness risks that no command chart can solve. The fleet system works only when deployment schedules are matched by realistic training time and maintenance capacity. In that sense, readiness is not separate from strategy. It is one of strategy's hard limits. A Navy can only sustain global presence if its people and platforms can absorb that pace. And once those forces are trained and deployed, another challenge emerges immediately: how to coordinate them not just within the Navy, but with allies, partners, and other branches of the U.S. military. Modern fleets rarely operate alone. Even when a numbered fleet carries the Navy's name and command structure, its real effectiveness often depends on how well it can integrate with allies, partner states, and the other branches of the U.S. military. This is one of the most important shifts in how naval power works today. A fleet is not just a collection of American assets in one region. It is increasingly a coordination platform that links ships, aircraft, intelligence systems, logistics hubs, and command staffs from multiple institutions into one operating framework. That function is especially visible in alliance-heavy theaters. Sixth Fleet in Europe works within a security environment shaped by NATO, where deterrence depends not only on American ships, but also on shared exercises, interoperability standards, port access, and common planning. Seventh Fleet does something similar across the Indo-Pacific, where Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, and other partners each occupy different positions in the regional balance. In these settings, the fleet is not merely present. It is constantly building compatibility, communications links, tactical procedures, replenishment coordination, air defense integration, and joint maritime awareness. The same principle applies within the American military itself. Naval operations are rarely isolated from the Air Force, Army, Marine Corps, Space Force, or Unified Combatant Commands. A fleet may support missile defense with joint sensors, move Marines for expeditionary missions, coordinate with land-based aircraft, or rely on space-enabled communications and targeting support. During crisis response, maritime security operations, and major exercises, the fleet acts as part of a broader joint force rather than an independent instrument. This integration is not automatic. It requires common doctrine, repeated exercises, liaison officers, shared planning habits, and systems that can exchange information without delay. When those pieces work, a fleet becomes far more than its ship count. It becomes a regional network builder capable of amplifying Allied presence and distributing operational burden. But partnerships and joint integration also depend on something deeper than command relationships. They depend on the technology that allows dispersed forces to communicate, navigate, target, defend, and coordinate across thousands of miles. And that technological layer is now reshaping every fleet in the system. Technology now sits at the center of fleet effectiveness. The modern U.S. Navy is still built around ships and aircraft, but the decisive advantage often comes from the invisible layer connecting them. Sensors, data links, satellite communications, electronic warfare systems, precision targeting networks, and cyber infrastructure. A fleet can appear large on paper, yet its real power depends on how quickly it can detect threats, distribute information, and coordinate action across widely separated units. In that sense, the fleet is not just a force at sea. It is a networked combat system spread across ocean space. This is where the numbered fleet structure becomes especially important. Fleet headquarters do more than track deployments. They help manage the information architecture that binds individual platforms into one operational picture: a destroyer's radar, a submarine's reporting chain, a maritime patrol aircraft's surveillance feed, and a satellite-enabled command link all become more useful when fused into a theater-wide system. That fusion allows commanders to assign missions faster, respond to changes in posture, and reduce the delay between detection and decision. The technological burden is even heavier in contested environments. Communications may be jammed. GPS signals may be degraded. Electronic signatures may reveal position. Cyber intrusion can disrupt command networks without a single missile being fired. This means naval technology is no longer just about better weapons. It is about resilience, keeping fleets connected, protected, and functional when an adversary is actively trying to blind, confuse, or fragment them. A clear shift in recent decades has been the move from platform-centric thinking to system-centric thinking. A carrier matters, but so does the network that keeps its air wing targeted and supplied with information. A submarine matters, but so does the secure architecture that lets its intelligence contribute to a wider operational picture. The fleet becomes stronger not only through new hulls, but through tighter integration of every sensor and command pathway. And as this technological web expands, it creates a new challenge for fleet commanders. They are no longer managing only ships, aircraft, and logistics. They are also managing vulnerability, adaptation, and escalation in a domain where disruption can begin long before a conventional battle at sea. As fleets become more networked and more globally distributed, one fact becomes impossible to ignore. Naval power is constrained by limits. The United States can operate across multiple oceans, but it cannot place unlimited ships in every theater at once, and it cannot sustain every posture indefinitely without trade-offs. This is where the fleet system reveals its most practical function. It is not only a way to organize power, it is also a way to manage scarcity. Every numbered fleet competes, directly or indirectly, for the same pool of destroyers, submarines, logistics ships, aircraft, maintenance capacity, and trained personnel. When demand rises in one theater, pressure spreads across the entire structure. A prolonged crisis in the Red Sea can consume escorts and air defense resources needed elsewhere. A surge requirement in the Western Pacific can delay maintenance schedules or reduce flexibility in Europe. Even when the Navy appears globally present, that presence is constantly shaped by prioritization behind the scenes. This makes fleet management an exercise in controlled compromise. Commanders and planners must decide which missions require continuous visibility, which can be handled by rotational presence, and which risks can be temporarily accepted. Some regions receive carrier strike groups. Others rely on amphibious forces, surface patrols, partner capacity, or periodic deployments rather than a permanent high-end concentration. The fleet map may look fixed, but the actual distribution of usable power is always shifting beneath it. The challenge is intensified by the cost and time required to regenerate strength. Building a warship takes years. Training a crew takes time. Repairing overloaded platforms cannot be done instantly. That means short-term decisions accumulate strategic consequences. A navy can surge faster than it can recover. This is why discussions about fleet size, shipbuilding, and readiness are not abstract budget debates. They are questions about how much simultaneous pressure the system can absorb before flexibility starts to narrow. The numbered fleets exist partly to make those limits manageable, but they cannot erase them. And once scarcity becomes a defining condition, the final question is unavoidable. What ultimate role do these fleets serve in the wider geopolitical system? And how is that role changing as the maritime environment becomes more contested and more complex? By the time the fleet system is viewed in full, its purpose becomes clear. The numbered fleets are not just administrative labels or remnants of naval tradition. They are the mechanism that allows the United States to convert maritime force into geopolitical effect. Each fleet takes ships aircraft, submarines, logistics networks, command staffs, and allied relationships, and arranges them into a regional instrument of deterrence, crisis response, and sustained presence. In simple terms, fleets are how naval power becomes usable at global scale. That role is broader than combat. A fleet can reassure allies without firing a shot, shape commercial security by protecting sea lanes, support evacuations during regional instability, deliver humanitarian assistance after disasters, or signal political resolve simply by repositioning forces. In many cases, the strategic value lies not in battle, but in controlled visibility. A destroyer in a tense strait, a carrier near a crisis zone, or a multinational exercise under fleet command can alter calculations long before open conflict begins. This is why the Navy's fleet structure remains central in an era of constant competition. It gives the United States a way to maintain pressure, preserve access, and respond across several regions without rebuilding a command framework every time conditions change. The fleets make persistence possible. They allow maritime power to function as a continuous background condition of international politics, rather than as an instrument used only during war. But that role is becoming harder to sustain. Rival naval modernization, precision missile threats, unmanned systems, cyber disruption, industrial bottlenecks, and crew fatigue are all changing the environment in which fleets must operate. Presence alone is no longer enough. A fleet now has to be distributed, resilient, networked, and capable of functioning under pressure from the first minute of a crisis. That points directly to the final layer of the story. The real importance of these fleets is not just what they are today, but how they must adapt to remain credible in a future defined by tighter resources, faster decision cycles, and increasingly contested seas. The final question is not whether the fleet system matters. It is how long it can preserve its advantage without changing its form. In the end, the U.S. Navy's numbered fleets are best understood as a strategic operating system for global maritime power. They divide the world into manageable theaters, connect ships to command structures, turn readiness into deployment, and translate national priorities into continuous action at sea. What appears publicly as a set of separate forces is in practice one integrated architecture designed to maintain presence, absorb crises, and project influence across multiple regions at once. That is what gives the fleet system its real significance. It is not merely about fighting wars, though it is built to do that if required. It is about shaping the environment before conflict begins. Fleets help secure trade routes, reinforce alliances, monitor rivals, protect choke points, support joint operations, and preserve decision space for political leadership. Their value lies in persistence as much as power. They keep the United States active in the maritime domain every day, not only during moments of open confrontation. But the strategic environment surrounding that system is changing quickly. Rival powers are investing in anti-ship missiles, submarines, cyber tools, space disruption, and unmanned systems designed to complicate traditional naval dominance. At the same time, the Navy faces its own pressures: maintenance backlogs, industrial limits, rising operating costs, recruitment challenges, and the strain of sustaining forward presence with a finite force. The result is a simple but serious reality. The fleet structure still provides global reach, but keeping that reach credible is becoming more demanding every year. That is why the future of the fleet system will depend less on preserving old patterns and more on adapting the framework itself. Commanders will need more resilient networks, more flexible deployment models, tighter allied integration, and a better balance between concentration and distribution of force. The fleets will remain essential, but their effectiveness will depend on how well they evolve under pressure. So the real story is not that the Navy has fleets in many oceans. It is that those fleets are the machinery through which a maritime superpower organizes deterrence, manages risk, and stays present in a world where the sea remains one of the central arenas of global power. The challenge ahead is whether that machinery can adapt faster than the environment around it changes.